on this episode of Postcards.
You know, when you're coming by Highway 10, and I hope you see the Batcher Block, and I hope you think about, I wonder what's happened there.
They ask me all the time, do Americans like this? Do your friends like this? Are they buying your artwork? And I say, yes, they are. They really like Tewa art. They think it's interesting.
But when one family caught more fish, we'd have bragging rights. You know, we'd sing and dance and tell everybody, well, what a wonderful catch we caught today.
Postcards is made possible by the Minnesota Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund and the citizens of Minnesota. Additional support provided by Margaret A. Cargill Philanthropies, Mark and Margaret Yakel-Julien on behalf of Shalom Hill Farms, a retreat and conference center in a prairie setting near Windham, Minnesota. On the web at shalomhillfarm.org. Alexandria, Minnesota, a year-round destination with hundreds of lakes, trails, and attractions for memorable vacations and events. More information at explorealex.com. The Lake Region Arts Council's Arts Calendar, an arts and cultural heritage-funded digital calendar showcasing upcoming art events and opportunities for artists in West Central Minnesota. On the web at lrac4calendar.org. Playing today's new music plus your favorite hits, 96.7 Cram. Online at 967cram.com.
The Batcher Block Opera House was built by Charles Batcher in 1907. Charles Batcher was a renowned architect in our community. He built over 200 homes here. He had a lumber mill. We've had many architects walk our building, and they said that whoever built this built it right. So Charles Batcher put his heart and soul into this building for Staples. 1920 was a big thing because it was a very vibrant time in our state at that time. But things were changing with technology. So that's where these talkies came in and this, the riskiness of it. And, you know, really the stage and the plays and stuff became kind of a thing like there's other things interesting to come. Charles Batcher was at the cutting edge. But then the 30s happened, and then it was Depression. So they were doing fundraisers, and when presidents got off of our train here and he came to celebrate birthdays for them, it all came to a head and they closed the doors and turned it into roller skating. But of course, this was about, I want to say, 5 years before they had the circus up here. For over 100 years, the type of bands that performed here in orchestras, from John Philip Sousa to Lamont Cranston. So, I mean, it is a fascinating history. In 2002, I had breast cancer. And at that time, I had a 1-year-old, and I was told by the doctors with my diagnosis that I only had a year to live. It was just too far, and many people have had this experience. But coming from where I was just really wanting to find a way to leave a history for my son. So my twin brother thought, well, let's not even talk about cancer, let's find her an extreme home. So he did. It was really a good push for me to be told I only had 1 year, because we would have never probably invested in this. But come to find out, Staples really did save my life. So it's okay to be told you only have 1 year. Look at the mountain we moved, and look what became of it today. And 17 years later and 16 years of chemo, you know, I think I've done a pretty good job showing people how to fight. It's been a blessing to live as if you only had 1 year.
We want it to be a cultural, historical space, something that we will continue to keep true to its original purpose, which was performing arts. We are going to include it as a cultural type center. It would be a city-owned building. The stage just blows me away every time. The original backdrops there, the lights around those are original. And it just blows me away to walk into a space and you literally feel like you step back 100 years in time. It gave me goosebumps my first time coming in here.
I've been almost a lifelong resident. I've been here for over 40 years. I even utilized this building when it was a department store. So I got a lot of history with it. I think it should be saved and refurbished, restored, because I think history is important. It shares a story about our community, and every community has its stories, its history. And I think also the building provides an opportunity to bring people together. Out of that comes the peripheral impact of greater community growth and benefit. And so I think that socialization aspect also provides a great opportunity. The favorite part about this building is this room itself, is that it actually was the wedding dance of our best friend. So I got a wedding memory in here.
When you're coming by Highway 10, and when you stop at that stoplight, I hope you look up, and I hope you see the Bachelor Block, and I hope you think about, I wonder what's happened there. And I hope that we can design it so you can see it's an opera house. That's my dream. And then when you drive away, I really think people are gonna stop. I think they're gonna stay. I think they're gonna fall in love here. This is a magical place. So that's what I really wanna invite, is to invite you in, to celebrate your history and then to help us create more.
I grew up in Ortonville, Minnesota, and my family is a family that appreciates art and appreciates fine craftsmanship. And so I spent a lot of time in my family's backyard shop watching my mother and father refinish and restore antique furniture. I grew up in a household that had beautiful old objects, and I learned to appreciate that. I started making jewelry at the Milan Village Art School, and I was about 13, 14, 15. And there I had the opportunity to work with an experienced silversmith. His name was Tom Johnson. He was a really loving, caring, patient man, and I was the youngest student in his class. And so he taught me how to make very simple bracelets at first by twisting wire together and soldering the ends. And so that was my first exposure to jewelry making. My first experience studying jewelry abroad was in Florence, Italy. I went first as an undergraduate student studying art history and metalsmithing for a year. And then I applied for a Fulbright scholarship to Kosovo, which is in Eastern Europe, and I was accepted. And when I was there, I worked at a master's filigree studio, learning the art of filigree. I enjoyed Italian Renaissance art history so much that I decided to get my master's degree and go back to Florence, Italy. I worked at Syracuse University and Stanford University as a teaching assistant. And then in my own time, I would apprentice with a Buccellati master in a Florentine studio. And Buccellati is known for hand engraving work. And so I learned from this very old Florentine goldsmith how to use engraving tools and to create this ornate, textured surface on metal. Following my time in Florence, Italy, I became quite curious about Asia. I had never been to Asia, besides my time as a foreign exchange student in Japan in high school. But I really didn't know that much about Asian metalsmithing techniques or adornment traditions in Asia. And so I sought out to apply for a fellowship with the Henry Luce Foundation. I flew to New York City for 2 days of interviews, and I was accepted as a Luce Scholar, and I chose to go to India. In India, I was placed at Mehrangarh Museum Trust, a 15th century fortress that was transformed into a museum in the 1970s. I worked as a curatorial research assistant, and I spent my days in the vaults inventorying and researching about 600 objects of armor, decorative arts, and jewelry. I got to spend my time every day looking at objects in my hand and trying to reverse engineer how they were made and perhaps research who made them and in what region of India did they come from. And so all these things were very interesting to me as a metalsmith. Outside of my time in the curatorial department, I spent time seeking out goldsmiths communities and spending time in their workshops and just watching them make jewelry. I lived in a room that was once one of the many queens of the Maharaja's rooms. So that was quite exciting and inspiring in and of itself. And that's where I made jewelry. I would finish my job around 4 or 5. I would go into the city and shadow the artisans until they closed their workshops around 6 or 7. And then I would go back to my room inside the fortress and I would make jewelry until 11 o'clock or midnight. So I would spend hours into the night, but it was something that I was enjoying. It never made me feel exhausted. I felt tired, but I didn't feel exhausted. I stumbled upon a group of goldsmiths that do Tewa work, T-H-E-W-A, Tewa. And it is a technique of fusing 22 karat gold foil that has been punctured into a pretty design to colored glass. And I really enjoyed and was interested in this technique because of how colorful and flamboyant it was. And it's not a technique that is done in the United States. And so I sought to collaborate with these artisans to design a couple Tewa pieces, and I would set them into sterling silver settings and create an adornment using their Tewa art. And so really the goal of my line, Laura Margaret Design, is to combine traditional Indian metalsmithing techniques into a Western contemporary adornment. What I like most about working with Tewa artisans and other Indian artisans is this sort of cross-cultural dialogue that we've created. I feel like I'm highlighting their art and I'm giving it new life and I'm reimagining it. And they're very curious to see Americans' reaction to their art. They ask me all the time, do Americans like this? Do your friends like this? Are they buying your artwork? And I say, yes, they are. They really like Tewa art. They think it's interesting. I feel really grateful that they have trusted me enough to do that. And because they don't know in what form their Tewa pieces are going to take in my necklaces and earrings. I love to come back to Ortonville, Minnesota and to the western edge here and sort of recollect myself. because when I'm out in the world, in India or in Kosovo or in Italy, I'm going, barely have time to sleep. It's very overstimulating. And so when I come back to the western edge of Minnesota, it's quiet, it's calming, and I have time to sort of think about what I've done and what I've experienced. The journey that my work has taken me on has made me traverse oceans and go to different countries in search of different culturally specific metalsmithing techniques. And that has given me a great deal of inspiration for my own work as a jewelry maker and metalsmith. And it's given me a wonderful set of skills to create jewelry that I feel has meaning and was made with care and was made with great craftsmanship because of the teachers that I've had in these various countries.
Well, my dad had 6 brothers, and they were all involved from 1940 up to about 85 when they passed away. And my dad, his name is Adolf, and growing up in Browns Valley was a commercial fishing town. There were about 25 different commercial fishing groups out of Browns Valley that did this commercial fishing seining. I did commercial fishing since I was 14 years old. Off and on for about 45 years, and every day was a joy. Commercial fishing does take place yesterday. There's one fellow out of Browns Valley, Terry Miller. He lives right on my home front where I was born and reared.
I always said, like everybody else, I'm never going to be a fisherman, but here I am, 58, and I'm a fisherman. Well, I grew up with it my whole life, never been away from it. There was 5 fishing companies, to the best of my knowledge, that operated out of Browns Valley, and several other smaller ones that processed fish. I mean, it was a booming industry here in Browns Valley in its day.
We worked through the Department of Natural Resources. They wanted the underutilized species of fish, or they call them rough fish, out of their lakes, carp and buffalo fish, suckers. After we took all the carp and stuff out, it made better fishing for the lake because we didn't have all those rough fish in the lake. One year down in Lac qui Parle, we caught over 15,000 pounds of 12-pound walleyes, and we had to throw all those back in the lake. And we had a lot of spectators, and they wondered, well, what was the deal? So we would say, well, we have to throw those back because we can't keep the game fish. You know, that's a state law. You can't keep game fish. We drive our equipment on the lake, and then we drill a big hole. And then the next thing we do, we'd have to drill a bunch of holes, make it like a minnow seine, and it'd go around circle. And then we have pulley ropes, and we'd have augers, and there'd be about 18 on the crew. And we'd put the seine in, and then when we get around the lake, then we'd have to have a great big hole to bring the seine out. And what they'd have is a great big pulley on a tractor that would pull the seine out. And then once we got way in the end of the seine, there'd be a live bag, and that's where all the fish would be. And they could be anywhere from 500,000 pounds or 100,000 pounds, or there could be nothing. But we usually caught a lot of fish. We seine during the summer and the winter also. Most of the fish went down to Spirit Lake, Iowa, where they processed them, and they ended up in Chicago and New York. They would flay them out, and they call them carp sandwiches or fish sandwiches. And we'd sell millions of pounds, all the different commercial fishermen from Minnesota. We used to smoke fish. Richard, my cousin, we smoked 10,000 pounds of carp every couple weeks, and we'd sell to Hy-Vee, Super Value, Red Owl stores when they were going. Smoked carp is a delicious fish. And then there's also Browns Valley. There was a company a few years back that made fish bologna out of carp. The seining, when they first started out, well, in 1920 they used horses and wagons, and then it got a little bit better where they had cars and tractors.
So everything has gotten quite modernized. We got little remote control submarines that pull the rope around underneath the ice that before they pushed 1x4s nailed together. That's what pulled the rope around. So it's gotten, just like anything else, it's gotten modernized to help. These tractors that you see here in the background now are today's best, I mean, basically everything's hydraulic compared to years ago. Everything was done literally by hand. Okay, these are a tractor here. This is called a pulling tractor. It's got a winch on the back side there for winching the rope in the wintertime. This is an auger tractor that you see. It's got a big auger here on the back that drills the holes, and that tractor follows over there, the winch tractor that pulls the seine. These boats here are my open water boats that I seine with in the summertime. And naturally we've got two tractors of each here, another auger tractor, another winch tractor here. And that concludes for the winter, besides the one outside that dips the fish. So that's the operation. Like I said, summertime, these are the boats, and I have 3 other boats basically we haul fish with, besides these after we catch them. This is what they used to chop the whole layout or seine haul with, was this right here. And now we use augers. These are just used to trim stuff up, basically. That part I don't miss right there. I'll take the hydraulics and the power takeoffs any day. No, this was a great invention when they came out with that. Dave Rod designed these, another commercial fisherman, that we wind the net up on in the wintertime.
Kind of wrap her up all day.
Whatever's laying on the bottom is going to get caught in the net. Couldn't be good, couldn't be bad, because a lot of times it tears the net up. Travers and Big Stone Lake actually had grain barges that ran up and down them. That's how they shipped the grain. And they said that's where the anchors came from that broke loose off of the barges and the boats.
December 1960, we pulled 1 million pounds of carp from Lacaparo Lake. Uncle Joe, that's my dad's brother, he said, we're going to have a lot of fish, everybody, and I didn't know what he meant by that. And once the seine started coming in, all these fish come in, everybody was jumping around and saying, well, we made a big haul. The other fishermen, we all worked together as commercial fish. We got along as family, but when one family caught more fish, we'd have bragging rights. So, I mean, it was kind of comical where we would say, well, we caught 1 million pounds, and this other guy said, no, that's not the truth. Well, we had pictures of it, and we had records, so we'd have a kind of a party over it. We'd sing and dance and tell everybody, well, what a wonderful catch we caught today. Well, I mean, a lot of people say winters are cold, but our fishing company, we'd have rubber gear. So that would make us a lot warmer. Then we have insulated pants, gloves. So it made it very comfortable. But unless it got 30 below, then we wouldn't be out in the lake. One time I fell into this great big landing hole. Well, what Dad did, he took one of these ice hooks and he dipped me out with this ice hook. And what I said, well, Dad, I can go home now. And he said, no, son, you can't. We got a pair of dry clothes in the truck. Go change and come back to work in 15 minutes.
Takes a special person to want to get wet in the summer and cold in the winter. It can be very rewarding. It's like any other business, and it can be quite stressful at other times. Back in the days, I've heard stories where they dip for 3 days to get the fish out of the net. Nowadays, our volume is not there like it used to be. There's no little fish coming back where it used to be years ago. It didn't matter where you went, the lakes were just full. And you no more than fish them down, as we'd say, catch out the surplus. And 2 years later, they were just as thick as they were before. And now you don't see that anymore. That's what I'm saying. I don't know. Our whole ecosystem has changed.
There are about 6 commercial fishermen left in Minnesota right at the moment, whereas there used to be about 30 of us. You know, it's kind of a dying art, but there is history to it. You know, I kind of hate to see it go down the wayside, but then I have good memories. On the personal level, it'd be being with my dad and my uncles. I got as a young fellow, I got to know life. I mean, they taught me so many things. They taught me how to be courteous and all this other things. And especially Richard, my cousin. Richard was a top-notch guy. He took over the fishing when my dad died, and then I got involved with Richard about 2 weeks later. We'd always be around family, and it was a family affair, so we worked out really good.
The smaller life, that's what I like. This is where I was born and raised, so your roots kind of dig in a little bit. You know, I mean, there's a lot of great places. I always said I'd move, but now I guess I'm old enough where I'll probably just finish staying here. I mean, I love the outdoors, so I guess that's why I do it. And we have a good time when everybody works together. The work is not that bad. It's a great life.
Postcards is made possible by the Minnesota Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund and the citizens of Minnesota. Additional support provided by Margaret A. Cargill Philanthropies, Mark and Margaret Yakel-Julien on behalf of Shalom Hill Farms, a retreat and conference center in a prairie setting near Windham, Minnesota. On the web at shalomhillfarm.org. Alexandria, Minnesota, a year-round destination with hundreds of lakes, trails, and attractions for memorable vacations and events. More information at explorealex.com. The Lake Region Arts Council's Arts Calendar, an arts and cultural heritage funded digital calendar showcasing upcoming art events and opportunities for artists in West Central Minnesota. On the web at lrac4calendar.org. Playing today's new music plus your favorite hits, 96.7 Cram. Online at 967cram.com.